Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Paul Brown, President Hilton Worldwide. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. I feel like I need to help you down or something.
Do you need this? Or
no, I think I'm okay. Thanks again for the introduction. It's really, really great to be here. I always enjoy my trips to this region of the world. In fact, I come to Asia 5 to 6 times a year because it's such an important part of what we're doing at Hilton Worldwide. And I always love coming here because I leave just incredibly energized and invigorated about what's happening in this region of the world and what it means for the travel industry overall. Just to share a bit of anecdote around how this region has changed, as I had the fortunate time a couple of weeks ago to be having lunch with Dr. Henry Kissinger, Nobel Peace Prize winner. As you know, 40 years ago, almost exactly 40 years ago, Dr. Kissinger led the initial visit between the United States and China to open the doors between the United States and China. It was really interesting as he talked about that event and obviously all the pomp and circumstance and obviously secrecy that was around that. And I turned to him and I said, well, really, this is just to illustrate how much the region of Asia has changed in the relationship between the U.S. and Asia. Is 40 years ago, it was such a big event for you to go in and have this initial visit pre the president going. And now, a U.S. executive such as myself never allow their multi-entry Chinese visa to expire in their passport. I cannot imagine where I would not have a valid visa at any point in time, because at any point I need to come to this region of the world. It just shows how things have changed in just a short period of time. You know, and Asia is going to continue to grow in significance in its the role in the world as it continues to shift and transition from just a key exporter of goods to also a net consumer of products and services. And in fact, you know, some interesting facts. If you look across Asia, Asia is projected to have a 50% increase in household consumption between now and 2015. And in fact, if you take a subset of the region and focus just on India and China, that number is 75%. And that increase in overall household consumption is translating into an increase in demand for travel. Now, focusing on China for a minute, there was a recent study by the Boston Consulting Group that said that if you look at the relative importance of household spending on travel and leisure, that has increased dramatically over the past, in its ranking over the past 3 years. And in fact, it actually exceeds the demand for designer and luxury goods and cars. So it's a very, very good news for the increase in household consumption is leading to an increase in the demand for travel. And that also has led us at Hilton Worldwide to partner with the University of London to do a study on outbound Chinese travel. And there's everyone should have received this in their packet. I do encourage you to read that, to where we studied the implications on the global industry around outbound Chinese travel. And just one of the facts is that outbound Chinese travel is supposed to increase at 20% annually, and that means that it's going to double between now and 2014. And the majority of that is going in the Asia-Pacific region as well as obviously around the world. So again, what does that mean then for MICE, for the meetings and convention business? Well, it has extremely positive implications on the meeting and convention business, and means that this segment of travel, we believe strongly, is going to become even more and more important over time, not just in Asia, but around the world. And in fact, if you look at a recent study that was conducted by the Union of International Associations, they report that the Asia-Pacific region's share of global meetings and convention business has gone from 13% to 25% in the past 7 years, and that's only going to continue to expand. Right, so if you're a hotel provider like us, that means, again, that the meetings business is increasingly important, and our partnership with meeting planners in the entire industry is going to become increasingly important over time. Now, I have to say that there are naysayers out there when you talk about the meetings business. There are people that would say, you know, there's some clouds on the horizon if you look at where the meetings industry is going to go, and that might stunt its growth. And those clouds are often cited. The two clouds that people talk about the most are economic factors, pressures on associations, pressures on corporations around so-called discretionary items like travel. And the second one is often cited is what are going to be implications of technologically facilitated substitutes, if you will, for meetings, whether it be video conferencing or whether it be social media or collaboration tools. Now, my belief is while those clouds may exist, I believe those are clouds with a silver lining, and that if anything, those will have positive implications on travel over time and not negative. So maybe I can spend a few minutes and just go into each one and talk briefly about them. Right? So the first challenge that is often cited is the economy. Right? Is the fact that what's happening is, given the challenges in the macroeconomic environment around the world, it's putting pressure on individuals, it's putting pressure on corporations that in the short term may lead to downturns in travel. Potentially, though, over the long term, it will force companies to find ways to replace travel. Right? Well, I have to, and if you look at the economy, it's true, if you pick up a newspaper every morning, or if you turn on the television, particularly if you live in the United States or you live in Europe, it's pretty depressing news out there, particularly recently. You start focusing on, you look in the fact that there's been a downgrade in the view of the growth of the GDP in Europe, what's going to happen with the financial stability of some of the regions of the world, the banking industry. If you look at the United States, it doesn't help that we're in the middle of an election year, but a lot of discussions around jobs, what's happening, and in fact, they even downgraded the growth projections of the United States by 50%. There are also signs that the issues that are being faced by the United States and Europe are going to continue to spill over into the Asian economies. However, when you move away and you stop watching the news, and I stop looking at the paper and I go back and look at our internal numbers, we don't see that negative impact trickling over into the industry. And in fact, if you look at our view of forward bookings in meetings business, so what we are seeing booked to date for next year, we are up significantly versus this time last year. And as I talk to my colleagues around the world, they would say the same thing. So our internal numbers and the industry numbers are not suggesting that the short-term economic challenges that the world is seeing is really translating into a downturn in the demand for meetings. In fact, I can't see a scenario, to be honest, where I see that we don't see positive growth in 2012 versus 2011 in travel overall, but certainly in the meetings segment. And I think it's important that we remain confident as an industry, all of us in the room and outside of the room, in the value that we provide. So regardless of the pressures that companies are facing around costs and other economic pressures, it is really incumbent upon us as an industry to be more forthcoming about the value that we provide to them. In fact, data is in our favor. Data show, we've had a lot of research on the value that meetings brings to companies, and I'll just give you a few facts. First, there was a recent survey conducted by Forbes, of business executives around the world. And one of the things that they said is that 85% of those executives favored face-to-face meetings versus virtual alternatives. There was another study by the Oxford Economics study that said that face-to-face meetings lead to a 40% conversion of business for companies versus only 16% for non-face-to-face meetings. That same study also said that 28% of existing business would be lost over time if companies stopped having face-to-face meetings with their customers. And then you sum it all up, and they sum it all up with an important fact that they have quantified that there is a 12-to-1 return on travel for companies. 12-to-1 return for business travel on companies. And there are very few things that I know that companies are looking at today that have a 12-to-1 return. Right? So it's important that we take these facts and others that are out there and feel very confident in the value that we provide to companies in light of any economic challenges that they face today. And in fact, it has also been proven that it is a competitive disadvantage for companies to stop travel and incentives when their competitors are not. And in fact, that is one reason you've seen some of the pullback, the increase in travel year over year as companies have realized that they cannot afford to cut back on these types of events and meetings when their competitors are not doing the same. Now let's turn from the economy to technology. So again, you've heard a lot about the fact of rise of video conferencing, particularly high-def video conferencing like telepresence, social media collaboration tools. That's just going to substitute for the need for travel. Well, it's really hard to quantify the impact, but it is true. These tools are increasing in their utilization. If you look at video conferencing, the purchase of video conferencing equipment is increasing about 15% a year annually and expected to do so and perhaps even increase. I don't need to tell anyone in this room about the prevalence of social media tools, whether it be Facebook, whether it be LinkedIn, whether it be various regional equivalents to that are continuing to expand. And beyond those types of social media tools, you're seeing a growth in B2B collaboration tools like Salesforce or WebEx, virtual trade shows, Microsoft SharePoint. So you absolutely are seeing a growth in those tools. But the question out there would say, so what does this mean for the industry? Well, I'm going to put forward a theory that you can either agree or disagree with, but we have a theory for that. And really, I think it'll have two impacts on the industry. The first is, if you look at the number of face-to-face interactions that any two individuals need to have over time. So two individuals, we already have a relationship with each other. How many times a year do we need to get together face-to-face? The belief is that probably will decline over time. One or two or three or four of those interactions might be able to be substituted by a VTC or by collaboration tools, which is true. That if you have a relationship, the number of times you get together, whether it be certainly individuals or small groups, will probably go down over time. But the other dimension, the other impact is perhaps even more important, is that what these tools and the growth of these tools are doing is facilitating the fact that we have more relationships with people than we ever did before. If you think about your own personal network, whether it be your personal network or your business network, think about how that has expanded and continues to expand over time. In part facilitated the fact that it's easier to connect to your friends via these social media tools, part facilitated by the fact that your business network has expanded fairly dramatically via these tools. Or if you're a company and you're using these collaboration tools, it allows you to think more openly about your organization structure and have more globally structured organizations or require more collaboration. So there is a dimension which is the number of relationships that any one person has is expanding. So you put those two together, and while the number of face-to-face interactions per relationship may be going down over time, the number of relationships that any one individual has is going up. And put those two together, and the impact mathematically on the need for face-to-face interactions is at least stable, if not going up. And that's really not hard logic to think through. However, it is important that even if the demand for face-to-face meetings is going to go up or remain constant, this does have an impact on the types of meetings interactions you have, right? And it's incumbent upon, it changes how we interact with each other. So it is incumbent upon us as an industry, both the providers of meetings as well as the seller of meetings, to think through that and be in front of those changes. So what does this mean? Well, if you are a provider of meetings, like a hotel company, there are a few things we need to be thinking about. We need to be embracing these new technologies and bringing them in and using them as a way to change the types of meetings that we facilitate, not trying to shun them off. So some examples of that, to where you can do a lot of interesting things in a meeting itself facilitated by these technologies to make that a richer interaction. An example of what Hilton has done is we have our annual, or every other year, we get all of our owners of our properties together around the world, about 2,000 of them. And we recently got them together, and we gave each one of them an iPad as they came into the meeting. So 2,000 people running around with iPads. And on that was loaded a conference application that allowed all of the materials that we are presenting to be pushed to them electronically after the session or during the session, real-time videos. It also included contact information of every other person at the meeting, including their photographs, and it allowed them to be communicating with each other, locating them where they happen to be in the meeting, and collaborating with other participants at that meeting in real time while we were facilitating this very big session. And it really, really made the meeting itself a lot more productive than it would have otherwise been without these tools. Now, that does require an investment of technology to do that, but it shows